I'm good again. How are you?
Good. So, hey, Eric, I would like to give you a choice of a couple of diseases. The spiritual basis of disease just fascinates me. One would be things like Down syndrome, autism, other forms of mental retardation. No, I'm not supposed to say it like that, but I'm not being politically correct. Or just other developmental disorders. The other, well, I'll give you two other choices: autoimmunity and then childhood cancers. Dealer's choice.
He says, I think these are all great, Mom. He's coming from a very humble place, and I'm trying to shift my awareness to my clairaudience so that it flows more like a conversation.
Okay.
Um, he says these are all good, very significant areas to cover right now because there's a lot of heavy hearts and questions over these areas. He says, I want to talk about childhood cancer first,
Okay.
then Down syndrome.
And other developmental, not just Down syndrome, but
Yeah.
yeah.
He says,
Okay. We'll divide it into two YouTubes though.
okay. He says, Mom, first of all, understand that every experience, everything we come into, he says, you already know this though. He says, hopefully by now, if you're watching this video, we all already know this. It's a part of your contract. He says, when you come in and you experience something so heavy, like childhood cancer, it is predetermined. It's a part of your contract. When children come in, Mom, he says, with, he says, whether it starts at, 3 months old, 3 years old, the whole purpose behind it isn't just the the setbacks for the child to experience. It's the effects, Mom. He says, first off, okay, you have the child in the family that has cancer. Now take that out and don't even focus on that, he says, and look at what it's causing, what is happening. He
Must be
says,
so awful.
he says, not in that way. He's looking at it with positive eyes.
Okay.
People can begin to come together through love or set their differences and disagreements aside for the betterment of something else. Like they contribute from a higher vibration. It pulls them into a more accepting vibration, to be able to contribute to that cause. Now, for example, what he's saying is, like, let's say that there's a family with a little girl, 8 years old, dealing with cancer. And for a couple years, these sisters haven't spoke. But now one of their children has cancer. So they all come together. They set aside their differences to contribute collectively. Even though it might be hard and there's probably going to be a lot of tears shed, they're still coming together on a common ground. He said, it's instances like, okay, he's talking really fast.
Slow down, Eric.
So it's instances like this, he says, that pull people into a certain vibrational frequency that collectively contributes to a higher vibration. So hold on to that thought. What's happening here is, he says, Mom, we often focus and fixate on the suffering and the child suffering, and this isn't fair. But a lot of times, Mom, if people can truly set aside their ego and look at what's really happening, he's like doing a drum roll. He says, what's really happening is complete resurrection on so many different levels. Resurrection of relationships, of emotion, of life. He says, let's say, the surrounding family. Let's say we're brand new into this diagnosis. We're all just found out. And the surrounding family has been jaded by life and day in and day out routine. Getting this news flash resurrects their awareness, he says. They begin to shift right back into the now and think, oh, I don't want to take any moment for granted. I can't believe this diagnosis just happened. So it's pulling them, circumstances like this pull them back into the now, he says, and it's creating this ripple effect that contributes to a higher vibration, believe it or not. He says, but we always look so, he says, he just stopped for a minute. He says, Mom, could you imagine if people focused on the silver lining instead of the dark cloud?
We tend to do the opposite, though, unfortunately.
Yeah, he says if they focused on the meaning and what's really happening instead of just narrowing in on, the negative thing or the suffering, if we could look at it, just shift our perspective and look at what's really happening, then we could see it with gratitude and know that it's contributing to the circle of life, he says.
I would have a hard time doing that because you have the prospects of losing a child. That's just would weigh heavy on my heart.
He's talking about the children that come in with this in their experience as a part of their contract. He says these are humanitarians. These are people that see and know that what they go through eventually will contribute to the betterment of people. So he says oftentimes these little people don't get recognized as a humanitarian in that effect. He says these people see and have the bigger picture of life's purpose, the circle of life, and so on. So this is such a valuable, and he's using his words with caution. He says this is such a valuable incarnation, Mom,
Mm-hmm.
and experience, because again, he's going back to resurrection on so many levels. It resurrects your awareness, relationships between families that maybe weren't speaking, um, even heart-to-heart bonds between parents and child. So he says, broaden your view a little, and I know he says, I know this is a tall order, and see what else is happening, the beauty that's coming from this. Because trust me, he says, your loved ones going through this don't want you to be burdened with sadness and pity. They don't want to be pitied.
Yeah.
That's a vibration that doesn't describe what they're doing or what their purpose is. So they don't want to be pitied.
Well, I mean, it's true. I can see that people could learn the value of life again, and how precious life is, undergoing an experience like that. What's the difference between this and somebody an adult that has cancer, as
Um,
far as the spiritual contract goes?
okay, I'll ask him that in just a second. Let me share.
Okay.
He was talking about. I said, well, why is it so easy then to like fall into pity, like that pity mode? And how come we always do that? Like, oh, this is so horrible, and I'm so sorry for her. This isn't fair.
Yeah.
And he said, well, if everybody could maintain higher vibrational emotions all the time, you probably wouldn't be in the human experience anyway.
Well,
He
yeah.
said, the density of who you are is why it's so easy to fall into the lower, dense emotions. It's much harder for you, he says, as humans, to hold on to and even step into the perspective of a higher vibration. Um, but he says all you have to do is shift your awareness and set your intentions. So the difference between children coming in and getting cancer at such a young age versus adults, he says, oftentimes it is still contractual. He says, believe it or not, Mom, though, it can be free will also.
Yeah.
Let's say, for example, your lesson in life is to learn complete self-acceptance, and you can't. You're struggling, and you have let it be open to free will as far as how you'll experience that. So
Hmm.
then you start to develop cancer, and now you're forced to accept yourself because you have nothing else but yourself to rely on. Your health is affected. If you don't have your health, he's rambling. He says, but if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. So now you have to accept yourself and what you're going through. Um, Oftentimes, adult cancers are just that, Mom, inability to accept
Okay.
yourself.
All right. So, what is the spiritual basis if it's not contractual for childhood cancer? You know how you said that, like myopia, nearsightedness, one of the spiritual bases can be you're not, I mean, taking life for granted, etc. Is there something like that with childhood cancer?
He says it's all fear based. He said if it's not contractual, it comes from fear.
Oh.
So oftentimes, Mom, he says this is emotions that are being carried from past lives,
Mm.
other areas of consciousness, other areas of incarnation experience. When they incarnate and experience cancer at such a young age, it's fear based and it's connected to lower emotions that are so stagnant that they begin to manifest physically. Um, and so I asked him, I said, well, what kind of fear? Is it, poor self acceptance, poor
Yeah.
confidence, fear of,
Yeah.
he says, most of the time it's fear of like moving forward. Um, Fear, even as a little 3-year old, fear of insecurity or not insecurity, like not being safe. If they don't feel safe, oftentimes that can come from a past life. But if they don't feel safe and they harbor that emotion, then cancer can be born. So there's so many ways, but he says it all derives from fear.
So a fearful child has a bigger chance of developing cancer?
He says they do, Mom, but it isn't always fear as we see it or know it, like, oh, they're just shy, they're quiet, they're
Mm.
scared to be social. It's a much deeper rooted fear. It's not
Okay.
just surface level. It's fear that they aren't even conscious to yet. He
Ah,
said.
I see. Oh, okay. Well, is there anything that can be done? I mean, once the spiritual contract is, to get family together, or learn the sanctity of life, etc. Once they've established that, then the kid doesn't have to die, really, necessarily. So, what can you do? What sort of things can you do to cure a child with cancer other than chemotherapy? What are some spiritual cures or approaches?
There's one key concept that he's trying to point to. This is for children and adults, he says. Acceptance. And okay, so what he's talking about is accepting what you're going through, the cancer, accepting it. He says, because Mom, you know just as well as anybody, the more you try to fight something because you
More
have,
persist. Yeah.
the more it's going to just grow and spread. He
Yeah.
says, there are some people that identify with, even over identify with their diagnosis. And there are some people that are just like, nope, it's not me. And
Okay.
that mentality, that vibration, it keeps them in a place where healing is um, much more able to happen, much more pronounced, he says, rather than if you keep trying to fight it. If you put everything you have into fighting it, you're actually just feeding it, he says.
Okay.
Um, just real quick, he's wanting me to share a quick example. Um, a few months back, my grandmother was diagnosed with colon cancer.
Mm.
Um, and she just never accepted it. She was like, I don't feel like I have cancer in my body. She's gone through chemo, she's had all sorts of surgeries, and she just didn't accept it.
Mm.
This is not me. I'm not going to die this way. And she wasn't fighting it. She was just like, I don't identify with this at all. And
Oh, I see.
actually, it's gone. It's
All right.
so if you can maintain that mentality of acceptance, accepting what is, you're more apt to be able to. Um,
But she didn't accept. It sounds like she was fighting against it by saying, "No, this is not me. I'm not going to have cancer." That's almost like a resistance to me.
well,
But
she
I know
did.
there must be a subtle difference.
Yeah, it's really subtle, and she didn't fight it, but she didn't identify with it. I guess maybe that's the
I
difference.
see.
She
I
just
see.
and
Okay.
she's kind of intuitive too. She just very much felt like I don't feel like this is me. This isn't
Okay.
my
Okay.
path. So you don't. Eric says even though you may be given a diagnosis, you don't have to identify with it.
Yeah, you don't have to attach yourself to it. I guess that makes sense. Well, what other ways can we treat cancer? Childhood cancer in
He
particular.
says, um, he says, going deep within. Um, this is hard because sometimes children may not even be of age to
I
realize
know.
understand how to do that. But for one, he says energy healing for the youngsters that can't even verbally communicate,
Mm-hmm.
um, cleansing them, bringing them energetically into the now. So if you know, if it's Reiki, if it's a shaman, cleansing their energy to bring it into the now so that they're
Okay.
not carrying or hosting old emotions.
Okay.
But also he says, Mom, the biggest problem in today's society that causes cancer among children, if it's a tangible thing, if it's a free will thing, is not allowing them to have a voice. If
Oh.
you deny them of their self or don't validate their presence as an individual, um, you feed that to them. So if they don't feel validated, if they feel like they don't have a voice and basically micromanaged,
Mm-hmm.
you're teaching them to not trust themselves, to not accept
Ah.
themselves, to not, and he's going on and on and on.
Okay.
So that actually can foster the growth of cancers that way too. Letting them be self-directed, letting them be themselves, in a safe, secure environment is going to be conducive to a healthy lifestyle.
That makes sense. What about prevention? I mean, if you think, oh, what if my kid is fearful from other lives, other incarnations, etc.? What can you do? Can you do past life regression on them? Is there any way to prevent fear-based cancer from developing in them?
He says past life regressions would be effective, um, but he also again says giving them the keys to their consciousness.
Okay.
That's when we take the keys, he says, and we tell them what they're experiencing and how they're experiencing it, they sort of walk around like zombies in a numb state.
Mm-hmm.
Mom, he says, which makes them really vulnerable to all sorts of illness.
Okay.
If their consciousness is not complete within themselves, because they believe you're in charge of them
Mm-hmm.
instead of them in charge of them, they're very vulnerable. So again, give them the keys to their own consciousness. Allow them to be their self.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Anything else on childhood cancers before we close?
He says, remember, open your eyes, people. He says, look around to the ripple effect. He keeps using the word resurrection. Look at all the newness that is reborn
Mm.
from these experiences. He says, as long as you focus on the bad, you'll continue to foster the growth of more bad. So
Mm.
shift your awareness. But that's all he says. He's blowing you
Wise
kisses.
words. All right. Love you guys.
Bye bye. Love you.
Bye, everybody. Like and subscribe if you do.